Welcome to the biblical city of Tamar or Tamara. You can read about this city in First Kings. It was built up over an oasis by the great King Solomon as he was building many places all around his kingdom when he became one of the most wise, important, and rich people of all the known world. And so you can see the entrance gates right here. This is a very important place because of its situation on the incense route, the northern incense route. And there are a lot of civilizations that came through here. And we're here to speak about the First Commandment. We talked a little bit about it actually further south. And this is one of the fortresses that actually guarded those copper mines in the very south of this area. We're in the southern part of the kingdom of Israel. And so let's go in and talk a little bit about what it means that I will worship the Lord my God and Him alone. Follow me. So now that we're inside this desert city, we can see how well preserved it is because we're in the middle of what they call the Arabah, or the Arabah desert. That word actually means a desolate and dry place. And the only way you would have a place like this that Solomon would have made into a city is because of that spring. It's actually called modern day En Hat Seva. And it's because of the spring right behind us. But it was just rediscovered or uncovered within the last, 70, 80 years, even though even Lawrence of Arabia came through here and actually talked about the fact that this existed. So people knew about it and civilizations conquered it from where we can see modern day Jordan, which actually borders this area where the Edomites lived. They had a whole shrine in this area where they would worship their gods. They found a lot of incense burners actually right in here. And then here the modern state of Israel. But this also marked the place of the southern kingdom of Israel. And that's why Solomon, when he was rebuilding, these palaces, the supply cities, the different towns, he really wanted to make sure that this was reinforced. Also to protect his mines. So this is a very important place, very low place. We're in the Jordan Rift Valley as these two tectonic plates are pulling apart. And we go straight from, Galilee all the way into Africa, going through the Red Sea area. So it's important because this is where the Israelites wandered. And there were people coming through here from the very beginning before it even became a city. In fact, right up this way, if you want to, take a camel up a place called the Scorpion Ascent because it zigzags all the way in through the desert. You can make it to other caravan cities like Mamshit, Shivta, and eventually all the way to the coast in Gaza, as the caravans did back in the ancient world, controlled by the Nabateans. Their capital city was right over here in Petra, and they were excellent traders originating in the Arabian Peninsula. And so this is what they would do along this entire desert route. They would be able to host camels. This was a very important caravanserai for that northern incense route, and also the north, that would be east-west, and then the north-south route of the mining and the trading for the kingdom. The southern part of the kingdom, and then all the way to the north. Eventually, the Romans even took this over. They actually gave the name to the Scorpion Ascent. Very interesting. They made it into a fort, and it was important, very important for them. And this was the southernmost part of where they were. Now, when we look at this place, especially when we think about the majority of the finds here so far in terms of the cult place, because they also had a Roman temple here, a small one. This was a place of worship of many different kinds of gods. The Edomites worshipped a god named Kose, but they did not allow the Israelites, if you remember, and this is why it's important to go back to what we're talking about in terms of the pilgrimage of freedom. The Israelites asked Moses if they could pass through the kingdom of Edom. And they said, no way. We remember who our older brother or who our younger brother was, Jacob. And they're still kind of bad blood, so you're not passing through the kingdom of Edom. So they couldn't go all the way around too far into their kingdom. They could come to different places. That's part of why they had to wander around so much. So this particular city has a lot in it: homes, these sacred places, this beautiful city gate. And the most important reason, and the reason we decided to come all the way out here in literally the middle of nowhere with all of you, was to take a time at the spring. And we'll see with our own eyes some of the traditions that continue to this very day of worshiping other gods. So follow me as we make our way to the spring, which is right on this side of the city. And we'll talk a little bit about what it means to worship the Lord. So follow me as we go up through the city. So we've come here to the top of the tell, and you can see that right behind me is what looks like a well. And that is because it's a cistern, and it collects the water that comes from different areas, including the spring that's still working. And you can tell where the spring is because there's an enormous tree growing right out of it. And that tree is the reason why we're here, right up here. Well, the city continues behind us, the ancient city that Solomon built. But we're under this enormous tree. Right beneath the tree are palm branches that are spread out, and you can see that the water or the ground is wet because the water is still coming from the spring. And it's almost as if this tree knew where to grow. And what's fascinating is peoples here, even today in this area, still consider this to be a sacred tree. There's a number of reasons. We'll talk about that right now. But the reason you can tell that partly is because of these palm branches spread before it. This is actually a sign of adoration, a sign of praise. And this great, elegant tree, which many people consider to be sacred in itself, is actually bowing down with its branches on the ground to this ancient tree growing straight from the source of life, straight from the spring. In fact, when they've come through here, they've even found traces of blood, animal blood. And what does that indicate? That in this very place, some peoples in this area, even today, are sacrificing to what they consider to be sacred. And so this is a remarkable witness of what it means to be religious, a remarkable place that's always considered to be important. So what is this tree? Why do they consider it sacred? Well, if you get really close to the branches of it, you have to be very careful because there are thorns that will go straight into your skin and they're bent. And so if you pull away, you'll have the flesh ripped right from your finger or from your arm or whatever it touches. And that's why it bears the name of Christ thorn. It's the Christ thorn tree. In fact, it's such an important tree that pilgrims from the time of, before the Middle Ages and the Middle Ages, pilgrims who would come to the Holy Land would look for this tree specifically and take some of its branches home because they think, even looking at the shroud, that this is part of the type of tree that was made into the crown of thorns that Jesus wore on his head. But clearly, these are not Christians here worshiping this tree. And it's also known then, this is what I want to explain, as the Jujube tree. After this type of tree reaches 40 years old, they say it becomes sacred because, it says, when a tree reaches its 40th year, the saints, in other words, the holy people, sit under it. Therefore, the saints will destroy anyone who dares to cut it down, because then, or cut down even one of its branches. And so you can tell, even where I'm standing, this is a dead branch, but it's holding up a live branch, and this one's also dead, but it's like they want to keep the whole thing together because they consider it sacred. So one story tells that every Thursday evening, the music of some instrument could be heard coming from the Jujube tree. This is a really important tree for these people, so much so that it's a place of worship. And this brings us to ask, why is it that the Lord, in his chosen people, said, me alone you will worship. Even if you see this, if you see it growing and giving life, and so many people even sacrificing right in front of this tree, no. I am the Lord your God. Worship me alone. So let's talk more about that First Commandment. So here, sitting in the ruins, I'm looking at the Roman baths when they made this into a fort, and just down south looking into Jordan. It's just an amazing spot. So if we talk about him alone you shall serve, and there's so much behind this commandment, the very first focus, which is on the Lord, as we've talked about. And so if we want to live this virtue of, I wouldn't even call it a virtue. It's the relationship with somebody who loves us and we've made a covenant with. There's a lot of characteristics that go with that. And that's summarized in this commandment. Him alone shall you serve. Him alone shall you worship. Him alone. He is the one. He's your one and only in that sense. Another way of saying the first commandment actually is, you shall have no other gods before me. And there's a lot of ways that I think, especially in society right now, and if we think about ancient cultures, there are people that put other gods before the Lord. And so he really needed to tutor the chosen people. And let's talk about some of those. One of the main roots of what I'm going to talk about are in superstition, or what some people call irreligion in a certain sense. But superstition is actually the extreme opposite of not having a religion or irreligion. It's kind of a perverse excess of religion. Like, I need my amulet, I need luck, I need all of these things. I'm looking for something above me to help me and to guide me, but it's not God. It's total excess, a trust in something spiritual. So superstition is actually this deviation of a religious feeling and of the practices that this feeling imposes, So magical practices, and to attribute the efficacy of prayers, for example, or sacramental signs to the mere external performance. If I just say this novena to St. Anthony, I'll find my husband. So as long as I do that, that's superstition. That's excess kind of imposition of something external, trying to control where it's not my place to control. And so we have to be careful with that sometimes, especially Catholics, because I carry the scapular, I do these things externally. It's like, okay, the internal part has to go along with that. So what about idolatry? Idolatry actually is something which is related to polytheism. Okay, idols, a combination of idols. They found things like that all over the desert because that's who the peoples believed in. In fact, people in the modern world have idols all over the place. And what it means or requires is that men neither believe in nor venerate other divinities other than the one true God. And so, we know very well that Scripture says, reject idols of iron and silver and gold. These are the work of men's hands. But in fact, I love part of the Scripture when it says these empty idols make their worshipers empty because they have mouths but do not speak and eyes but do not see. And it says those who make them are like, hold on just a minute, those who make them are like them, empty, right? They can't see or speak. And so are those who trust in them. However, God is the living God who gives life and intervenes in history. So, there's a lot of places in the Old Testament it talks about that. So idolatry, what does it consist of? It's divinizing what is not God. What does that mean? Well, man or mankind, all of us will commit idolatry whenever we honor and revere a creature in place of God, whether they be gods or demons. I mean, Satanism is something which is very real, but we often place in the area of God power, pleasure, race, ancestors, the civil state, money. These are all idols in the modern day world. And we have to remember very clearly that Jesus, underlining the reality of the first commandment, says you cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot serve both. So idolatry rejects the unique lordship of God. He is the only one. So that's why it's incompatible with communion with him. You can't have both. So human life only finds its unity in the adoration of God himself. So the commandment to worship the Lord alone integrates us. It brings us together and saves us from this total disintegration of going after so many different things. All right, what is another characteristic of irreligion, or breaking in a certain sense, not following this commandment and disintegrating ourselves? Well, it's divination and magic. So what does this mean? We know prophets can reveal the future, whatever. But a sound Christian attitude consists in putting one's confidence in the providence of God, whatever happens. And this means giving up all unhealthy curiosity about it, knowing that we're in the hands of a loving God that has made a covenant with us, that he is good. He is good. Now, another form of this, of divination, is, divination itself. What is that? Conjuring up the dead, seances, falsely supposed unevil things in the future to avoid it, horoscopes, astrology, palm reading, interpretation of omens and lots, clairvoyance, recourse to mediums. They all conceal a desire for power over time and history. That's what's happening there. And in the last analysis, other people, we want to control them as well. So we want to kind of like call forth or conciliate these hidden powers. And that contradicts many times the honor, respect, and loving fear that we owe to God himself. Who fell into this? Well, who falls into it now? Who have you read about in the news that's doing this now? But even here in, among the chosen people, the very first king over them, Saul, in Endor, went to consult a witch because he wanted to know the future and therefore control history and control power. Well, control history and time and everything that was happening. He wanted to maintain his power. So all practices of magic and sorcery, by which one attempts to tame occult powers, to place them at one's service, or even worse, to have supernatural power over others, that is contrary, gravely contrary to the First Commandment. And even worse if it's for the intention of harming someone. And those things do happen. So like I said, charms, bracelets, spiritism, this all implies divination. All right, let's talk about something which isn't maybe quite as clear, and that is irreligion. And it's something that we see a lot in the world today. Now, it can seem really simple, but we do this often. Okay, testing God or tempting God. That means, okay, Lord, I'm going to test and see if you're really good or if you're real, if you show me a sign or this word or this deed. It really depends a lot on what your internal intention is. But remember, Jesus didn't fall into that trap when Satan himself talked to him when he was out in the desert. Throw yourself down. You shall not tempt the Lord your God, is what he says. And so this, when we try to do that, it's because we're actually harboring a doubt in his goodness or in his providence. What's another one? Sacrilege. Sacrilege. It's profaning something sacred. Worst part would be the Eucharist, but profaning statues, profaning places that are consecrated to the Lord. Many times this will happen in really disgusting ways in the modern world. But this is completely against God. It's actually very, it's almost evil in that sense, but it's really trying to offend the Lord himself. Another one is called Simony. That's when you're trying to sell spiritual goods. It's actually named for Simon the magician that you can read about in the Acts of the Apostles. And what he wanted to do was to buy the power of healing and all the things that the apostles were doing. And he really got reprimanded. St. Peter actually told him, may your silver perish with you, because you thought you could obtain God's gift with money. And that's in Acts 8. So it's impossible to appropriate spiritual goods. They come from him. They come from God alone. And believing that and living according to that is part of the First Commandment. Finally, I just want to talk about two other things that we see around us in the modern world, much more so than in the ancient world. And I say that because wherever you go in these countries, in these areas, you will always find, like I said, little temples or little places of worship. One of the signs that a civilization was built up is that there's actually temples and places for sacrifice and worship of the supernatural. And where that doesn't exist, you have atheism. Atheism is very clearly against the First Commandment, but it's like when you're stepping outside of this covenant with the Lord, you're stepping out of this relationship. And it's a very serious problem of our time. In fact, many of our contemporaries, this is a quote from Vatican II, many of our contemporaries either do not at all perceive or explicitly reject this intimate and vital bond of man to God. They don't even perceive it. They don't reflect on it enough. They just continue on with life, just keeping busy. I've got so many things to do and I just don't stop. That's why they say that time, space, and silence are modern day luxuries. And they're also dangerous in a sense. Dangerous for anything contrary to God. Because when I don't give myself the time, space, and silence, I never think about him. There might be something which is kind of restless inside, but I don't think about him. And that's very common in today's world. Now, atheistic humanism falsely considers man to be an end in himself. Or they consider that constructing a utopia here on earth is actually, making his own history. That's what atheism really is. So they seek to liberate. Everybody seeks freedom, right? So they're seeking freedom or the liberation of mankind through economic and social liberation. You can see this everywhere expressed in politics. And because of that, atheism considers that religion in its very nature thwarts the freedom of mankind. And that's why many times you'll have the atheist just butt up against religion itself. Because what they're saying is that man's hope in a future life deceives him, makes him less free, and discourages him from working better here and now. And that's actually the opposite of every Christian doctrine. But you can understand where it comes from, and it's a very common modern understanding. Now, another reason this happens is because believers can have more to do with it. To bring atheism about, because they're not instructed in their faith. That's why having religious freedom is so important, but having formation of people who actually profess to believe something is even more important, because then you and I can engage in conversation. You can convince me of what you believe, and I can help to try to convince you of what I believe. Because without that, it just becomes sort of very surface level, and it's very easy just to sort of knock down and become unimportant in life. It's not a conviction, and it will never be a decision. It never gets deep. And therefore, most people that are very badly formed in their faith end up becoming agnostics or even atheists. So we can't let ourselves go down that road. So agnosticism, just to finish up, is really just kind of a sluggishness. What's the point? I don't either say God exists or he doesn't exist. I just refrain from that. There might be a transcendent being, but he's not able to reveal himself. It's just easier to go on without thinking about it too much. That just takes away from the great vocation that we all have to eternity. We know that deep down inside if we give ourselves a chance to think about it. But without that, there's just indifference. There's, like I said, sluggishness, all of this stuff. And not only in belief, but it actually takes root in us in a moral way. We start living in a way that it really doesn't matter. And that's why we see so much lack of virtue in today's world. So I don't know, there's a lot of things that we talked about here. And so what I would like to invite you to do is to take out that your own 10 Commandments. And from the different things that we talked about today, looking at this sacred tree behind us, just reflect and write down, gosh, what are those idols I might have in my life that are replacing God? Where is some of this sluggishness that I have inside? Or even, how is my understanding of the faith? Could I actually engage in a rational conversation with somebody so that they can also reach their fulfillment in the Lord? Or even more so, deep, deep, deep down, do I have a doubt that I'm really made for eternal beatitude and everyone is made for him, made for the Lord, that he's really in covenant with me? These are all questions that people had to wrestle with as they came through this desert. These are questions that they had to wrestle with when, they come to a difficult time in their life and they're like, my gosh, who do I turn to if I don't even know if the Lord God is there? Magic, luck, charms, special trees. Where is that in my life? And then we can start writing our own renewed covenant with the Lord through the Ten Commandments, which is the declaration of his covenant with us. So as we finish up here in this really cool archaeological site of Tamara, I hope one day you can visit it. Just know again that I want to reiterate every day that we've been praying for you. We'll continue to pray for you, and we hope that we can see you again tomorrow as we continue our adventure, our pilgrimage of freedom, our exodus through the desert as we make our way to Easter. And may God bless you.